name is Jun Liu. I'm president of TIRF. How many of you know the meaning of TIRF? What does it stand for? You asked me that question, you know. THE, the International Research Foundation for English Language Education. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your support. Today, we are going to have 6 presenters. I'm the moderator, but each one of them is related to TIRF in a different way. Mina from British Council is a new TIRF board member. Yay! McBride is a former recipient of DDG, Doctoral Dissertation Grant. Berger from Duolingo is the co-author of TIRF President Jun Liu.
Can you stand up so we know?
Yes.
Why don't you stand up? They will have enough time to stand up. Okay. So then Joyce Kling is a former TIRF board member and the current past president of TESOL. Evelina is semi-new member, but first time at TIRF board meeting from Cambridge Assessment. Spiros is from ETS, also a long time board member of TIRF. TIRF's mission is to empower language teachers through research. That's the reason you are here. Today we have chosen a cutting-edge topic about AI, generative AI and language education. So each one of them will have a chance to present from his or her own perspective. How do you look at it? Is it facilitating, helping our teacher, or disruptive? Are we going to lose our jobs if AI can do everything? So they are going to talk about from learning, teaching, and assessment perspectives. After that, we are going to have interactive session to take questions, to debate. So you will leave the room with excitement. Always remember, you are part of TIRF. Thank you very much. Now, first and foremost, I'd like to invite Cindy. And she is going to talk about affordances and constraints for learning materials, generative AI. Cindy.
Thank you very much. I'm going to keep an eye on the time here because I can be a bit verbose sometimes. Can you hear me okay?
No.
Yes.
No. A little louder? I'll project some more.
Loud.
Louder? Okay. I'll kind of pretend like the mic isn't here then. Is this okay?
No.
Yeah. Yes? Okay.
Speak into the mic.
Okay. One moment. I'm going to move this cell phone, if that's okay. Is that better? Any better? Yeah? Continue projecting? All right, if it gets too loud, someone give me one of these. Okay. Thank you all for having me here today. I'm happy to chat with you a bit about what we learned at Duolingo, about what's possible with generative AI, specifically for developing learning material. I'm not necessarily for the next few minutes talking about putting learners in front of something like ChatGPT. We do have some conversational features that allow dynamically generated conversation to take place that we're building internally with pretty significant guardrails. But for this lightning talk, I kind of just wanted to focus on what I thought would be the most applicable across a range of contexts for TESOL practitioners. And then, I'm happy to kind of expand from there. I'm looking for the arrow. Okay. Before I talk about some of what we've learned, I do want to clarify what I mean when I use the term generative AI. I'm not referring to artificial general intelligence, something like HAL from 2001. I'm really referring to these large language models, sometimes called LLMs, that are trained on massive data sets of language, and they are essentially predictive text on steroids. And they can do what human brains can do quite well, which is predict what's likely to come next, given what came before it. So, here at its most basic level, if I were to say I really like French, I think we know something like fries or movies is likely to follow. A little less likely to follow might be fast food. And then when we get into less grammatical construction, something like the or are is not likely at all or impossible, might not even exist in a data set of 1 billion words. So this is what I mean when I refer to generative AI, and in my mind, this is what I mean when I talk about like what these LLMs know about the world. This is the extent of what they know about the world. It's still quite impressive, and we can still do quite a bit with them. So with that in mind, what can we do with them? One thing we found right away is that generative AI is very good at manipulating existing text. So here we took the opening of A Tale of Two Cities. We asked it to rephrase it as if it were coming from a member of Generation Z. And you can see the result here. Obviously more of a parody of Generation Z speech, but we have found that just manipulating text, especially with regard to existing styles, is something generative AI is very, very good at. It is also very good if you give it simple directive rules. The more detailed the instructions, the better, the more specific and targeted the output you're going to get. So here, instead of just asking for a joke, we gave very clear outlined steps of how we wanted that joke to play out, and we end up with something like Count Scratula. AI is also generative AI specifically, is very good at, it's not good at genre analysis, but it's very good at mimicking existing genres. There's kind of a distinction here. So in the sample up here, we asked the model to write a cover letter for an accounting position that was actually written by a tomato. And the tomato is trying to make its tomato skills very transferable to finance. It did a pretty good job, and for those of you who might teach more advanced English learners, you know that learning to understand and reproduce genres like this is very important, learning to recognize the conventions, and so we think that personally, I think there's a lot of opportunity here in language classrooms and beyond for capturing and teaching genre, and specifically in learning materials. We also have learned that generative AI is very, very good at iterating on previous output. So when you give it a whole bunch of instructions at once, it's likely to fall apart or break or start making things up. But when you break it down and you ask it to do one thing, and then you take that output, feed it back in, and ask it to do something else, it's very good at that. So I'm going to walk you through some output. First, we asked the model to explain stereoscopic vision to a cyclops, then to take what it produced and make it less clinical. Then we asked it to name the cyclops Jeff and try to be a little more sensitive to Jeff's feelings. Then we asked it to translate the passage to Spanish, and finally to identify 3 grammar concepts that might be challenging for Spanish learners. For the sake of time, I'm going to move through this quickly. Here is steps 1 through 3. We end up with this fairly informal explanation of stereoscopic vision to a cyclops, mindful of poor Jeff's feelings. Then we end up with a Spanish version. For all of the Spanish readers in the room, this probably isn't perfect. Usually translation from something like GPT, which is the LLM we use, it usually requires a second pass, but it's a good start. And then finally here were it actually gave us 4 challenging grammar concepts that were occurring in that passage. Okay, what is generative AI bad at? Lots and lots and lots of things. Among them, critical thinking, empathy, communication, and also more specifically what it can be bad at could vary based on the model, and models are updated constantly. But one thing we noted right away, it's bad at something simple like randomness, cannot pick a random number to save its non-sentient life. It doesn't understand proficiency, external proficiency standards, the way that you all do. We have found that describing a proficiency level does much better than using a label that exists externally. And you may have experienced or read about this. They're just bad at math. They're very, very bad at math. They're also bad at current events. Data sets might be outdated. Some models have access to the internet, some don't. the internet itself is very, very bad sometimes, and so just kind of as a reminder, I think we all know this, but you can't count on generative AI to know the right things about the world, the good things about the world, and so also trustworthiness in general. It can be used as a search engine or an encyclopedia, and then all the caveats I gave about empathy and critical thinking as well. But these more concretely, when generating material, are important to keep in mind. So I will get out of here for now. Again, this was very, very brief. I hope at least this piqued your interest in terms of some of what's possible with generative AI for learning materials. Beyond that, more dynamically generated feedback, chatbot-like experiences I'm happy to chat about. There are certainly valid concerns with use of generative AI, both in TESOL and beyond, and I'm happy to chat about those as well. But thank you for your time.
Very good. Next week, I'd like to invite McBride to talk about powerful tools about AI in sense of human rights and thinking differences.
Hello again. If you were here at the beginning of the panel, you heard me say a few words about my colleague, Dr. Radmila Popovich, whom we lost at World Learning in January. She was, oops, this is me. She was originally supposed to be on this panel. So, at some point I was asked if I could take her place, and I thought three things. One, no one can take Radmila's place. Two, I love AI, and in fact I used it in multiple ways to prepare for this presentation. And three, what would Radmila do? So, I got in my Radmila space, and the genius of Radmila was that she could say just the right thing at just the right time. She wasn't a verbose person. She was always so targeted, like a super teacher who would give exactly the right scaffolding at any moment. And it would often seem like a subtle, small thing, but it would be a small change in direction that over time would change the whole trajectory of your life. And Radmila always, like I said, she always kept a focus on what was really important. So we can kind of contrast these two things, right? Cindy just described to us that AI can do so many things, produce so many words, but it doesn't have the empathy, it doesn't have the critical thinking, it's not authentic. And so we can contrast that to my dear, dear colleague who was all of those things. So I was having all of these deep thoughts, right? And I was thinking, you know, what is it that is good in life, and how can we use AI to uplift the things that are important to us and to avoid the threats that we see in AI, you know, losing our jobs, students not developing critical thinking, not developing empathy, and so forth. How can we do that? So I turned to UNESCO. I find that they are a very good source. They have this guidance for generative AI in education and research. And I was inspired by their constant focus throughout the long document on human dignity, on cultural diversity, and this idea of knowledge commons. And I was also inspired by how the document really leans into how it is the educators, the human beings, who are the ones who are able to help students develop critical thinking, be well in the world, right? So it is us, the educators, who need to guide this ship. You know, and we need to guide the ship because we're experiencing two radical existential threats right now as human species. On the one hand, the environment, and on the other hand, there is a very serious mental health crisis going on in the world that has brought unprecedented levels of anxiety and really damaged a lot of students' attentional control. These are threats that we're facing. So, what can we do about this? I posit to you that one of the most important things is physical presence. When, for example, we want to be mindful, we pay attention to our breath. When someone is at risk of a panic attack, they need to come back into their body. Like I said, I love AI, I love virtual reality, I love technology. But there is something disembodying about technology. And we need to find ways to keep human beings in their human bodies and keep critical thinking. I work at a nonprofit that works internationally, and the general fight for good education is along this continuum. It's been that way forever, and it's becoming radically more so. Because AI can produce that product. We don't need memorization, so we need to focus on the process much more, and we need to focus on soft skills. So to close, I go back to the UNESCO document that really shouts out to the reader how we are at a critical moment in the history of education. We're going to be needing to do some radical redefinition of what it is that people need to learn. And so you are the ones to do that, and I look forward to discussing this even more after all of the talks. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now we are entering into the stage. Whether you like it or not, do you believe in AI in the future? That's a topic for next event. Joyce.
Thank you. I'm wearing heels too. That's. Thank you so much, Jun, because I am making a transition here. I don't work for TESOL. I'm a volunteer, as all of you are TESOL members. My day job is a teacher trainer. I work in Sweden at Lund University. And I was really thinking, what can I bring to this discussion of AI? Because, like most of you, I use it, sort of. I don't really know how. It is something that I'm thinking, I really have to bring this into my teacher training. So on a Friday, before Ryan's deadline to get slides to him sometime in February, I asked my students, look, in reflective writings, can you tell me what this means to you? I'm talking about first-year bachelor students, young bachelor students who are looking to be high school English teachers, gymnasium teachers, upper secondary school. And they write, and they say, AI is the future whether we like it or not. And it's this not thing that seemed to be a running theme with a very young generation of future English language teachers who had a voice of they're somewhat terrified, right? They do see the advantages. We talk a lot about, and in their minds, AI is often ChatGPT. They get all sorts of statements and honor codes as students themselves, what they're allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do. You can do this in your, yes, you've been using a spell checker your whole lives. Or you can still use Grammarly, don't worry, but you can't do this. Or all the things that my colleagues have been talking about. And one of the women, she was thinking very much from that empathy side as a student about AI still can't do the teacher's job. A teacher's job is about teaching her students, and it's about showing compassion and supporting your students, which is something a computer can't do. They're disconnecting between this idea of tools and their role. But what stuck out to me the most was a text from the youngest member of the class. It was a 19-year-old man who was starting in his English language teaching journey, and he really said, he goes, I know that generative AI, like ChatGPT, is something we'll have to adapt to as teachers, but I'm very angry about it because I really don't want to. I hate generative AI, and I feel that it rarely has any purpose in any context at all. He went on to discuss art and music, and he was very passionate about this. And as we moved on, he said, maybe I'm just, this is a 19-year-old, maybe I'm just like an old man who refuses to learn new technology simply because it's new and different. But I hope I will never have to use generative AI in my teaching or otherwise. And this was a Friday night, and it took my breath away. This is also someone who is a very modern-looking young man in many ways. He lives on the edge in the way he dresses, the way he speaks. But it really put into my head, what are we thinking about? And I wanted to then see, well, what is TESOL? So I'm putting on my TESOL hat. And so TESOL, what do? We provide continuous professional development because we recognize that many people in our community are scared of the fact that their students are coming in far more savvy about tools. They're using tools. They are using tools to quote unquote cheat, right? And this is the mantra that's going on. So I did reach out to Brent Warner, who is essentially the face of TESOL's professional development, about what he's been doing. And Brent is an award-winning educator, and he is a community college professor. He focuses on integrating technology in the classroom. And we have been so fortunate to have Brent providing for our TESOL community both webinars, classes, and blogs. And he mentions in his own comments, I'm going to scroll down a little bit in my notes here. He mentions that every time he starts a session, it's as if he's meeting people who are going through the 7 stages of grief. Right? And think about yourselves. What is it? Anger and denial until we get to acceptance. And so he ran a course where we had over 100 participants in February focusing on these 5 issues. And I'm sure that if you advocate for it, we'll get another session going. But it was an overview of AI and TESOL, issues and concerning all of these aspects, so that all of these tools that our vendors and our colleagues can provide that the students are using can help the teachers know how to use them in the classroom, because we seem to have that disconnect. 1 minute. Since the beginning of since November, when the world got the notice that ChatGPT-4 was available, Brent has been blogging for TESOL, and you can go online and see these headings, right? He's out there, he's writing tools. They're accessible. Please go online onto TESOL's site. So the final comment that the students have was, I do believe, though, that we can find a way to make this work, as Brent is helping us also. Teachers, and this was so sweet, teachers managed to deal with the internet. We're not even going back to the calculator, okay? Teachers managed to deal with the internet when, I guess, it was considered a problem as well. Just like all new things, they're scary until we get used to them and learn to work with them rather than against them. So I'm bringing you the new young teacher trainee's voice and thinking about how we can reach out to guide the process to lead with teaching and learning. Thank you.
So far, we have 3 presenters already delivered their perspectives. As I recall, I myself went to a tech company, and the question I have is whether a group of computer gurus lead education or educators guide us to design what we need. So this is the question. The next presenter is going to tell us how can we stay ahead of generative AI? What are our roles in the sense of assessment? Ladies and gentlemen, welcome, Evelina from Cambridge Assessment.
No pen. No pen. Okay.
Thank you so much, Jun. So as you've seen, we have lightning talks. They're very, very quick. We have through learning. We're going to continue with assessment, and then we'll stop at the end and bring the discussion on both of these aspects. Okay, so let me just find the button. So I'm not used to this keyboard. All right, so how can we stay ahead of genAI language assessment? I have this beautiful image from Japanese art. You've probably seen it before. It is the Great Wave of Kanagawa by Hokusai. I chose it because this painting is beautiful. It can be both a tsunami that is going to obliterate villages. It can be a wave that the ships can surf. So really that is the dilemma we have right now in language assessment especially. What is going to be the effect of this incredibly powerful technology on assessment, because it can make or break the next generation of language tests. So I'm just going to cover 3 very, very key areas in assessment. This is a short talk, so this is really just to get us started to think. So the first one is, how can tests really become transformed? How can this technology help with transformation? How can we deal with what is called explainable measurement? And the third one is human-centered assessment. So we need to not lose sight of the importance of the human. So very quickly, transformed assessments, how genAI can really impact in this area. And here's a nice quote from somebody a professor who deals with decision making in humans, and he said, ChatGPT may make it a little easier for students to cheat, but the best ways of thwarting cheating have never been focused on policing and enforcement. And this is exactly the principle I think we need to adapt in language assessment. We need to design tests that incorporate the use of GenAI instead of policing against it. We need to develop tests that develop new skills and criteria for success and have positive impact by preparing students for the skillful use of GenAI in their actual lives. So, the calculator moment. Joyce mentioned the calculator. I think in language education we're going through exactly this calculator moment, not just in assessment, of course, in learning. When the calculator became widely used in the 1970s and 80s, it transformed mathematics learning and assessment. So now we have in most education systems maths learning which uses calculators and which doesn't, and the same in assessment. I believe the same should be happening in language education. How can we bring this technology into our assessments, but also find cases when we don't? So for example, we can have assessment scenarios where use of AI is not allowed, or it is encouraged and expected as preparation, or it is required. And just like with the calculator, even though this device can do a lot of very, very sophisticated mathematics, in primary schools we still teach children them times tables. We still teach them how to calculate 5 times 6, even though the press of a button can give them that. Because these are foundational skills that the technology can do, but they're still part of curriculum. We should be doing the same with language assessment. What are some of the skills that have to remain part of the curriculum, even though they can be done by machine? Very quickly explainable assessment. This is about how transparent the decision of the machine is. So the computer says no. Do we know why? In high-stakes decisions, this is really, really, really critical. And the technical term is AI explainability. How much can we explain the decision of the machine? The tricky bit here is that as AI power goes up, explainability goes down. As AI power goes down, explainability goes up. So we can explain less sophisticated models better. But in AI's, in assessment context where the stakes are high, explainability must be a priority. In other words, we may have to use less sophisticated models that we need to be able to explain. And finally, human-centered assessment, we mustn't lose sight of this, and this has come up as a theme already in the presentation. So really, language assessment needs to tap into the consistency of machines, but also preserve the human factor. Machine scoring of writing, of speaking is 100% consistent. If you give it the same script, it'll give exactly the same mark it is given. But are all the essential features of language captured? So it is consistent but possibly narrow. Hybrid human-machine scoring and also test development optimize the strengths of the machines, but also the human examiners and test developers. So this really is the approach that I believe we should be going into, a hybrid approach that takes the best of both worlds. And I shall stop here and say thank you very much for your attention and pass over to Mina.
The next two presenters will also focus on assessment. So Mina, the author of The Future of English, is going to talk about changes and the challenges.
Thank you, Jun, and thank you, Evelina. So I know that this session is about AI and generative AI and technology and all the whizzy, lovely things that we can or cannot do with it, or it can or cannot do with us. What I'd like to do by talking about assessment in the next few minutes is kind of put language at the front and put technology on the back foot just for a moment, because just as technology is advancing in ways that we possibly can't all understand all the time, well, language is changing, and so is how we teach it. So, and as language changes, teaching and learning changes, so does assessment. So what is changing? And I'm basing my talk now on kind of the Future of English work that the British Council has been doing. The concept of proficiency is changing. We at the British Council are definitely challenging notions of native speakerism, whatever that might mean. Proficiency is changing as most contexts in the world now are multilingual. English is no longer seen as an isolated item. Increasingly, people are not talking about English in schools as a subject, but English as an enabler to learn other subjects, to learn other things. Language is no longer about knowing the language, but what can I do with a language? Challenges. In terms of assessment, these are 4 words: creative, contextuality, innovative, and holistic. So my premise here is that if we're teaching young people to be successful in their lives and attain their ambitions, one of the things that they need to do, I think, to be successful is do the work that they enjoy. How are education systems preparing them for that at the moment? Because a lot of employers are saying that they're not. And assessment is part of that. So I know I'm talking about assessment, but I think it was Evelina who said that, teaching, learning and assessment go together. They're not isolated items, they work as part of a system. So what I'd like to ask here is that if we're preparing young people for employment and success in their lives, shouldn't our curricula and our assessment reflect that? Language assessment literacy, this is really important and something I'm very, very passionate about. We talk a lot about assessment, and I'm not moving away from technology here, but language assessment literacy is having the knowledge, the skills, the expertise to use assessment in whatever you do, whatever your role is, in the best possible way. So knowing about assessment, knowing the place of assessment in what you do. And therefore, what's the role of technology in assessment? Now, Evelina's just given us a brilliant few minutes about how technology can help and not. I would like to say, and I think somebody did ask the question, I think it was Jun actually, what comes first, the technology or the people that drive it? I would like to say it's the people that drive it. We should be driving the technology, not the technology driving us. So what does this mean in terms of teaching, learning and assessment? So I don't know if any of you know this, but it's a comprehensive learning system from a paper by Barry O'Sullivan in 2020. It's not a new concept. The fact that we have the curriculum, the delivery of the curriculum and assessment, and that they all should work together in a comprehensive system driven by standards. It's not a new concept, but the way that Barry puts it forward, I think is very accessible for everyone. Every comprehensive learning system, whether it is a primary school in India, whether it's a secondary school in Egypt, or whether it's higher education in China, sits within a context of use. That context of use, as well as being the actual physical environment, is made up of stakeholders that define that context. And one of the stakeholders now is technology. So what is the role of technology in making that system work? And now I'm not talking about assessment on its own, I'm talking about the system as a whole. How can we use technology to inform curricula, to help with delivery, and also to inform assessment? How can technology help us, right? As opposed to how can we work to meet what technology is doing in society today. And I'm going to leave you with that. Thank you very much. Oh, one more thing. Sorry, one more thing. I did forget. And this is a shout out to my colleagues in the British Council who have just written a report on AI in education systems around the world. I'm sorry I don't have a QR code for this here, but if you go to the British Council stand, there's a QR code for it there and you can download it for free. And I will stop there now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Our last presenter is Spiros, Papageorgiou. Yes, he's talking about test validation in the era of AI.
Yeah, I have like about 20 minutes, right? So we kept that presentation last, I guess, because it's a very light topic for the end after 5 nice presentations. So we're gonna talk a lot no, we're not gonna talk a lot, but I'm gonna give a very brief discussion of argument-based approaches to test validation in the era of AI. I only have a few minutes, so basically, what is an argument-based approach to validation? It's an approach that drives the design, scoring, and research agenda of language tests. An extensive application of this approach is the book that you see on the right side of the screen. And so, if I could describe an argument-based approach to validation in 2 sentences, how would I do that? I would say that the goal of an argument-based approach to test validation is to provide support for core claims about the interpretation and use of test scores. And the way we do that as test developers is that we specify certain warrants. And we collect evidence from theory, from test documentation, from empirical evidence, and we also consider rebuttals, and the rebuttals can challenge the warrants. The key point I want to make today in the couple of slides that I have is that it is important to consider the use of AI, whether it's generative AI, whether it's AI for automated scoring of speaking or writing. It's important to consider the use of AI in language assessment within that approach to test validation. Now, the way we typically organize a validity argument is through what we call a sequence of interconnected inferences. And this slide shows the 6 main inferences from the book that I showed earlier that we used at ETS. And I'm not going to go into technical details. The point that I want to make in this slide is that this chain of inferences drive everything about a test, where starting from designing test tasks that reflect real-life use in the domain inference, generating test scores that are psychometrically sound, the evaluation, generalization, explanation inference, and then ultimately, and what matters the most, is are these scores useful for making important decisions, and do they bring positive consequences in the classroom? Because if the test scores don't bring positive consequences in the classroom, there's no need to use them. So, what are some of the key questions that we ask when it comes to using AI in the context of language assessment? What I've done in this slide is I've created some questions that we might ask as a research agenda for each of these inferences and validity argument. But in the interest of time, I'm going to focus on just 2. I'm going to focus on the beginning and the end of the chain of inferences. So for the domain inference is, do we have test tasks that reflect what learners need to do in the real world when they use the language? So the question to ask here is, can AI generate tasks? Because we increasingly use now generative AI to create test content. Are these tasks too constrained, or can they represent the real-life tasks that we want to replicate? And if they're too constrained, do they lead to what language testers refer to construct underrepresentation? Do we tend to have a very narrow approach to what we actually testing? Think of a reading passage. Can we use generative AI to test high-order comprehension skills, or are we going to be limited to skills instead of focusing on high-order skills like inferences and synthesizing information from different sources, which are very important comprehension skills? Are we going to end up with a very narrow coverage of the reading comprehension? In terms of the utilization inference, if we end up with constrained AI-generated test tasks, what is the impact for teachers? What is the impact in the classroom? So, just to keep things very simple with the key takeaway of my presentation, we will keep, I believe we will continue to see applications of AI throughout the whole test development process, generation of scores, use, the impact that these scores bring in the classroom. But if that application of generative AI continues to grow in assessment, in the way we generate content, we test, we score, and so on, what doesn't change is the need to collect the important validity evidence that the scores do what they're supposed to do. Generative AI doesn't change that. Validity is a key issue for language testing members. Thank you.
Excellent. Now I'd like to invite all the panelists to come to the front and to interact with you. I'm sure you have lots of questions.
You can sit here. Oh, yeah. I think this is better. All right. So again, I'm the timekeeper, so I want to make sure that we have about
45 minutes. Okay, so we saved enough time for you to ask questions. My question first. Sorry, because as I listen to all the presenters, there is a fundamental point in my role as the president of a university. How can I train and educate the youngsters who are not only good in their own respective disciplines, but also good in AI? What kind of courses should we provide to students in all majors? Are we going to merge College of Education with data science? Or are we going to encourage collaborative research and co-minor or major in two areas so that in the future, the teachers are not only good in teaching this discipline, but also good in AI, rather than making them passive in following AI, or they might lead AI. Looking at the panelists, both Kara and Cindy, they are outstanding students when they did their doctoral studies, but they have a savvy focus and interest in AI, in technology. And that's why they chose their dissertation in those particular areas, psycholinguistics, in the Cindy's area, and the Kara, it also focus on AI-driven listening comprehension. So, you don't have to answer my question. That is a question open to all. I would like to see what question you have for the panelists. All right, let's ask AI. Do we have a microphone we can pass so that we can hear your questions?
He's working behind
If
you.
not, then you stand up, speak louder, ask your question. Anyone? Yes, stand up, please.
Yeah. I teach ESL history, so how do I make sure that my sources are reliable that come from like ChatGPT?
Excellent question. Who wants to take the answer?
John, can you repeat the question to the audience?
Let him repeat again. History.
Yes, I teach ESL history. How do I make sure that the information I get from ChatGPT is reliable?
Yes, Joyce, you have something
I'll
to say.
start from the non-tech. I'm the non-tech. A couple months ago, I did a little debate with some of my students with this pro and con in teaching in these classes, and it was very interesting to hear these undergraduates discussing their trajectory. Can you hear me? Okay. Their trajectory with their education, and they start reflecting again on their lived experiences, to go back to the plenary this morning. And one of them says, do you remember when we were in high school and we were told, you can't just use those wiki pages. They aren't accurate. They don't know. You can't get it back to that. It's prescriptive. You can't do something. And he said, and then about a year or two later, we all were like, no, you can look at wiki pages, but make sure you reference them. And he said, today, would any of you ever use a wiki page as a source? And I went, no, of course. I don't think it's training about if the source is accurate. We go back to the term that was used. We're training our students for critical thinking skills. And we're training them in understanding what a solid reference is and where they're going for those things. So you can't be policing everything that comes from a technological agent, but you can be leading your students to understanding how to find solid, reliable, valid sources.
I think I meant the question more of me as a teacher, because I use AI to get like texts that are at an appropriate level for students.
I'll follow and then I'm going to leave.
Yeah.
Then I think you could even walk through with your students. This is a source that AI came up with. Let's do a deep dive into researching a solid source. And because that's what I showed my students first. I put in my own name and my co-author about our research, and AI produced names we had never heard of and articles we had never written. And let's look those up in the database. Let's look them up in Google Scholar. Let's go to the university library. and they were blown away and like about, wow, those aren't real skills. Although I got a lot more resources. Then I'll leave it.
Can I just, I think an important first step is helping students understand, and teachers, what you get from this very powerful technology sounds very confident and very knowledgeable, but you have to develop a critical approach. Just that first point is really important, the idea of approaching critically, because, and that's the skill we need to be developing, as Joyce said. That's a really important first step in that. And we can look at intelligence in different ways. One is meta-knowledge. We have that, machines don't. That is awareness of what is good knowledge, what is a good source, what is a good publication, is truthful. Developing meta-knowledge is part of the new skills we need to be enhancing in the classroom, in teachers and students.
Can I just pick up on that as well? I completely agree with both Evelina and Joyce. And this speaks to Jun's question as well, is that all these critical skills, in order to help your students, I think teachers need them as well. And this goes back to pre-service education. So what is pre-service education doing to support teachers to work with generative AI and have that critical knowledge that they can then share with their students? So I think that goes back, and I think there has to be an element of education there, not only about digital literacy, but the whole critical element of, how do I know this is good? How do I evaluate the usefulness of it, not only for me, but also my students? So I would go a step back as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your question.
Actually wanted to say one more.
Okay. We have more questions, but okay, short answer, please.
Just, it doesn't always, as, Joyce was saying, it's not always, and, people said we need to be critical of what it comes out with, and I think because AI can allow for scams in a new way that we've never seen before, it can make videos of people saying things, that's one of the biggest dangers, that finding authenticity is going to be one of the biggest challenges in the future. So we really need to get students with those skills of being able to discern.
Very good. All right. Next question, please. Yes. Would you please stand up, speak louder, please?
Hello, everyone. I'm an ESL teacher from Turkey. My name is Saja. And I have a question, actually. This generation, actually born with those technological, equipments and everything. They're really good at adapting themselves to new technologies. But there's a huge crowd of parents, like us, and they're a bit scared of new technologies and what's going on, is AI a monster or not? Some of them think that they're gonna take teachers' job from their hands. Some of them think that, oh, that's good, they can do their homeworks with it, or I can teach them home. I can be a teacher thanks to the AI. So how can we explain? That's my question. How can we explain parents and how can we explain them what should we do with AI in an effective way at home, or how can that be? Sorry, I couldn't put them up. Okay. How can we encourage them to use it in a good way, actually, at home? So parents are wondering about it a lot. As a teacher, I think we should inform them better. So how can we do that?
All right, so do we need to repeat? What can we help parents to understand how they can help their children who are in digital generation?
It's not a monster for
Okay.
their children.
Got it. Any answer? Yes.
Yeah. Thanks for that question. I think bringing parents in is really, really important. So I do appreciate your question. My first question, throwing it back to you, is: do parents know how you are using it in school?
Yeah,
with your
they're
students?
using, because we're informing them what are we doing, and sometimes I'm giving them homework about using it. I'm giving them a project, for example. So a family project. They can search online using AI, sometimes the videos or some audios. They should get it back to the homework.
So for me, helping parents to understand how they can help their children with AI is just an extension of that. So however you're informing them, whether it's by sending a leaflet home or inviting them in for a meeting, I think it's an extension of that. I know in this happened in Malaysia. It wasn't in a public school, it's in a private school. They are having kind of seminars for parents in terms of education, because parents in Malaysia are very, very worried about kids generally. And you used the example of AI. When mobile phones came in, parents were equally worried, right?
Yeah.
So for me, a simple answer, and as an example, is just having parent seminars where they appreciate and can see what you're doing in class, but then by extension, they know what is possible at home. It's a very simple answer, but that's something I...
Very good. So gentleman next to her has a follow-up question.
To piggyback on her statement, the UN guidance is 13 to not really have a lot of activities associated with generative AI for students until the age of 13. It's not ambiguous. I know you guys referenced that. That I would be I've done a lot of work in this field the last couple of years. I would be very cautious in assigning homework that deals with AI without a lot of adult oversight. There are hundreds of stories you can quickly Google and see how that's gone completely off the rails. The security guidance is not there yet on these things. And a second question, just on that, I'm pretty convinced this is a job replacement. Talk me out of that. I feel like we're sitting around in a room and GPS has come along and we're talking about the role of maps in the future, and no one uses a paper map anymore. Convince me I'm wrong. Because the technology we're talking about right now is a toy. It's moving 2 times at the rate of
How long do you have, sir?
it's
You are wrong.
sophisticated quickly.
Okay, now, quick response.
Can I just get back to what Saja said? I think, to your point, I think the first step is always ethical use. That has got to be the starting point for teachers, for students, for parents, for school decision makers. So really understanding in your school, do we have a policy? What is that policy? Is it an ethical safeguarding policy? That is the starting point, and then that becomes the foundation in which parents become AI ready and students become AI ready. I think that has got to be. We did a survey at Cambridge with teachers. We asked them, what is the policy in your school? The biggest proportion, 36%, did not know if they have a policy or not. So I think you have to be proactive to have that as the starting point. Persuade you that it's not a job stealer. One of my favorite quotes is by an American educationist whose name I can't remember right now. He said, every teacher that can be replaced by computer deserves to be. In other words, we need to, McKinsey, big management consulting companies are saying the genAI is going to impact education massively. We're like #1 sector that will be impacted in a positive way. We're going to grow massive billions of new productivity, but we can tap into that if we upskill and reskill the main decision makers, and that's the teachers. See, if we keep doing what we're doing now, we'll get replaced. But we need to develop new skills in ourselves and our teachers. That is how we won't get taken over by the machines.
That's a good sales pitch.
Very good, all right. All right, more questions, please. Yes.
Good morning. I am a Venezuelan professor, and I really appreciate your points of view in the presentation. And I would like to ask you something that I also have my own answer for that, but I would like you to let us know. Do you think that generative AI will replace the teacher in the classroom? That's my question.
Very similar to the previous.
Okay, let's hear from panelists who haven't had a chance to speak up yet. Cindy. Okay, Karen. Okay, they don't. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a couple of thoughts swirling based on various questions, and I hope we'll eventually get to that one. In terms of parents and how they can understand what's happening and guide their children, I think we can't all be AI researchers. To be clear, I'm not an AI researcher. I'm an applied linguist. I barely know how to turn on my television. What I have tried to do in the last few years is understand conceptually how this works, so that I can make ethical choices and so I can guide others. I don't have to actually be the one programming the models, but conceptually making sure our children and students understand that these models they're not magic, they don't come from thin air, they're trained on actual data, and that data will inform the performance of the model. And if that data is biased, if that data is skewed, if that data is representing a version of the world that's not the world we want to live in, that's problematic. And to the extent that your children understand that, I think is very important. That our children understand that, our students. I have a 2-year-old, I don't know what she's going to be doing by the time she's 13. I can't even begin to imagine, but I do want her to know that, like, you know, even Instagram filters are using AI, and they are trained on some sort of standard of beauty that is potentially problematic, but I want her to know that and understand it conceptually, so that's kind of important. And then replacing jobs, I'm not concerned about this, but as someone who can't really turn on her television, I don't actually have the sort of hard skills that the majority of my colleagues have at Duolingo. I wasn't trained in coding, I didn't go to robotics camp during the summers. This could be an opportunity for people like me. I mean, I realize that's a very optimistic perspective, but you know, we used to operate based on muscle, and now it's like it's been this knowledge age, and now we could move to a world where more humanistic training is very valuable, where relationships are valuable, where social intelligence is really valuable. And so if I'm investing personally, that's what I am thinking about in the spaces that I operate professionally. And those are ways that I think we can talk to students as well.
Thank you, Spiros.
I have a couple of thoughts. So we talked about the calculator. Well, the calculator did not replace math teachers, right? We still teach math. So that's the first thought that some of you mentioned that. Before generative AI, we've been using Google search for all sorts of things. You know, yes, I can download also, I can create all sorts of things with generative AI. I can do that with just Google. You know, I can download essays and use these as my own essays as a student. I didn't need ChatGPT to do that. I could do it already. So the maps, the question about the maps. The people who design paper maps, I'm pretty sure they moved to designing electronic maps. They have the skills that, from my perspective as test developer, we use language teachers to generate content, right? We can use some content now with ChatGPT. Guess what? We still need these people to review the content that generative AI produces. So we still need people because, you know, will generative AI become so good that we don't need teachers? It seems like the answer is no. We will still... I think the key is, what are the other things that we need to do in the classroom when we generate materials, when we generate assessments? What are the other skills, the opportunities that we get from AI? So I think it sounds like we're agreeing that, you know, we still need teachers.
Kara, you have something to add? Oh, one more after. Yeah, Kara first.
So I do think that the role of teachers is going to change very radically, and what we need to be teaching students needs to change. You know, there are lots of statistics coming out about the damage to mental health around the world and the damage to learning gains over the time that we were learning virtually. We did great things as educators and set up lots of wonderful programs, but students experience language loss, especially the most vulnerable people, and the mental health crisis is completely out of control, even though it's, you know, hard to see at times. So great, if you can press a button and get a paper generated, that's one thing, but can you actually go to the office every day, or can you even, you know, operate? So we're needing to teach, you know, just, I'm kind of amazed at how, you know, it was 21st century skills before, and we've been talking about it for a very long time, but exactly those skills are the ones that are becoming so much more important. So I think instead of just facts and content, we're going to be doing shifts of the processes. How do you use these tools?
I have a quick comment based on what you said also. I've been asked the question from my business colleagues at ADTS, and I'm sure others have been asked this question, when Google Translate came out. So Google Translate came out, and people were asking, are we done that anymore? If we have Google Translate, and I can just speak to Google Translate on my phone, why do I need to learn English? And I'm hearing that from some colleagues in other countries. So people are asking, why do I need to learn English? I'm going to have some kind of device soon, and that device will translate from my own language to English, so I don't need to learn English. Has anybody seen decline in demand for English language learning in all these years? Google Translate has been out for how many years now? People still want the skills to communicate in another language. Will that change? We don't know. But so far, demand for English language learning is only rising. It's not going down because we have the technology. So let's see if that changes.
All right, final comment from Mina.
Just building on what Kara said here, our research shows that actually employers are saying
you know what happened to 21st century skills? You did all talk about it, and you said you were going to do it, but it actually never happened. It seemed like we just kind of stepped over it. But to answer your question, I mean, we've been talking to young people as well, and yes, AI is amazing, and they love technology. But they actually like talking to each other. They like that dynamic, that classroom dynamic. They like talking to each other. And I think that's very important, because that goes on through life. We don't stop talking to each other as we get older. But finally, it occurs to me that we are really talking about our own little bubbles, because when we ask the question, is AI going to replace teachers? Well, there are many, many parts of the world. There is no technology in education yet. You know, there isn't. So those teachers are not going to be replaced, and they're still doing amazing work without technology.
And is that going to accentuate the digital divide?
Well, that's a different question. That's a different question. Yes, I think it is in the short term, but I think that's a different question. I think that teachers are incredibly important and will remain to be incredibly important. But as I think we've all said, the role of the teacher is inevitably going to change.
Because your question is critical, I think this is fundamental. So I just want to share with you this morning in the Times magazine, there is an article, featured article, "The Generative AI Revolution will disrupt America's biggest labor market, but its impact may not be what you expect." What I want to say is that I don't think teachers will lose jobs, but if teachers are not recharged, re-educated, lifelong learning, following the path, they will slowly be pushed away. So that gives us opportunities for teachers, gives us opportunities for them to continue learn and unlearn and relearn. That is a lifelong learning. Should always keep us going. Okay, I saw 5 hands. So whoever can stand up first will have the chance. Yes, all right, Michael. Yes, Michael, TIRF board member.
TIRF board member.
Oh, all right. So Michael, you already stood up, so next one we'll
I wasn't going to ask a question, I was just going to make a very, very optimistic comment based on history and based on the more elderly contingent of TESOL people. 35 years ago, I was standing here in the TESOL convention talking about using computers in the classroom. In the computer-assisted language learning intersection, and everybody, we were having panels with exactly the same conversation. Will teachers be replaced by computers? Will we all get fired? Will people go insane because they're looking at screens all day? It didn't happen. Don't worry.
Very good. All right. We are reassured. TESOL will continue. All right. Yes.
Hopefully I'll speak loud enough. I teach in a different context from what's been talked about so far. I teach at a community college in San Francisco, and in our non-credit program. So I'm teaching beginners, and if you are, and a lot of times it's just, beginning with, "Hi, how are you?" That sort of thing. Teaching remotely during the pandemic, I had to learn to use a lot of technology I hadn't been using before, and yet I find myself returning again and again to simple paper, pen, whiteboard work, now that we're in the room again, very physical activities, because I don't find that the technology is always the best tool for learning a language. And so I'm asking myself, we're also very overworked, as I'm sure many of you are, and so I'm asking myself, what do I need to learn? Do I have to use AI in the classroom? I mean, yes, digital literacy, yes, we need to, but many of our students can't even use a mouse. So I'm taking them to the lab and teaching them how to use a mouse. So again, I'm asking myself, how much do I need to learn and use? Is it necessary? Why would it be necessary in my classroom? Yeah.
actually one of the reasons why in my presentation I said physical presence. I think we're just forgetting that there is so much about being with somebody, picking something up. Our, neurons are distributed throughout our bodies. They're not just in our heads. So if we move, that helps for learning. I think, AI should be used where it's useful, as many people commented today. And hopefully, because you're overworked, you can find a way to do it outside of the classroom to save you time on something.
I mean, that's exactly it. Productivity can increase, can improve with GenAI. So you can have GenAI create different reading passages for you at different levels, which addresses different skills in your classroom. You can get it to create quizzes based on questions, and that helps you as a teacher. And you still keep the classroom for the human aspect that the machine can't do. But I really encourage all of you who are not using it yet, experiment with it, because it really can help your productivity. It can.
Yes. Oh. All right. You.
Nancy Tobin from Hudson, Massachusetts, and I'm just going to say something in regard to that last comment. That I have my reluctance sometimes, but as a time saver, I do a lot of role playing in my classroom, and I have learned to put in whatever the little words are that I need to help me to, narrow down what I want, and up comes 15 different scenarios for role plays. I print them, I cut them, I pass them out back to me as one little piece of the great time saver.
Very good practice, please.
Yes, my name is Peter Valley. I teach McBride at UC Berkeley and at the University of San Francisco. I saw a quote recently, and I was wondering if you guys would respond to it. It says, "Let's stop calling artificial intelligence. Let's stop calling it artificial intelligence and call it what it is: plagiarism software. It doesn't create anything. It just copies existing works from artists and alters them sufficiently to escape copyright laws. It's the largest theft of property since Native American lands corrupt by Europeans." That's no Chomsky.
Oh. Chomsky is not at University of Arizona, and our vice president of TIRF is director of TESOL. It's a SLET. Do you have a comment? Did Noam Chomsky tell you about that? He said that. Okay, Cindy.
I think this is a really fascinating conversation, and I'm curious to see how it evolves in legislation, particularly with visual arts. I think the visual artists and filmmakers are going to have the loudest voice here. So my perspective on AI, I don't know if this is obvious or not, is influx. It's still evolving, but I do have some predictions. I think that there will be some, maybe 10, 15, 20 years from now, an option for content creators to opt out of data sets. I suspect that will be possible. I don't think that will significantly slow down the sort of generative AI, at least that I talked about today, because there is so much free stuff out there on the internet. Wikipedia, for example, is used massively in training sets. So, I hear you, and it is a valid perspective, but I'm not certain it's going to slow this train down. It just could get really interesting in terms of copyright laws. So there's that. I also think, though, what that could mean, and I think this applies from a technical perspective to the question you asked, another prediction is that in 10 years, we have a few of these really big generic learning models that are used for certain things, probably for materials development, and then these bespoke LLMs are going to start to emerge that are trained on much more specific data. There might be in 10 years an LLM that you would go to for the most historically accurate data, and others that you don't touch. There might be LLMs that are more useful for English language learners for some reason. We have simple Wikipedia for English. So I think that the various needs, there will be LLMs for specific purposes, I guess. And in the same way that if there are any corpus linguists in the room, that you can't just use the same corpus to answer a question that you would use for a very different type of question. And I think that your question could be part of that, as these become bespoke, as some people opt out, as some people opt in because they want their work out there, we might see a lot of different alternatives.
I think these are really excellent points. And in terms of now, I think it's really important for your students to understand the complexity of IP and intellectual property. So you were saying they need to be aware that everything they put in that is not theirs could be a problem, because they might be breaking some intellectual property ethical approaches. So I think it's really important to raise that awareness in your students right now in terms of IP. And to comment on the intelligence, intelligence is not a good name, because these machines don't have knowledge. They just have facts. They just have words, which is not intelligence. So I think I really recommend the work of two scholars. One is Harold Gardner. I'm sure you're aware of him. He talks about 5 different kinds of selves of intelligence. So Harold Gardner, look up his definition of intelligence, human intelligence. And Rose Luckin, she's a British professor. Again, she defines human intelligence. And that just really gives you a broader set of insights about what is human intelligence and what is artificial intelligence, or rather facts that these machines work with.
Very good. I saw, another hand.
Yeah, thank you. Zuzana Tamash, Eastern Michigan University. Maybe we could rename it as artificial AT, right? But my sort of question to pose is this. My biggest fear, we have so many sessions, we are so excited, everybody's going to take off with it one way or another. I think that the continuum with the worst possible practices is going to be a teacher who looks at the lesson plan, gives it in the classroom, kids go to ChatGPT, give them the ChatGPT for this paper, teacher goes and asks ChatGPT to give feedback. There is no ever any interaction of who thinks what and who teaches what. That's in my mind the worst case scenario, right? As somebody who does community engaged approaches, I take students to urban farms and high literacy to, hands-on community local approaches. So, but I could use AI to do the work I don't want to do, where students can still build vocabulary, and that's what you're saying, right? So that in my mind is sort of the best way to go. But I think as a field, we need to put out a statement and guidance for teachers, because my real worry is the new teachers will take these approaches the wrong way, and will be more on the terrible part of the continuum than how you guys want us to use AI. So I think you really need to strategize as experts how this communication is going to go out to members, so that people are taking the right paths.
Thank you very much. At this point, I think you have mentioned a key point, that how we can empower the utilization of AI through our own profession. Who can do it? TIRF, right? TIRF will be in a unique position to gather all the evidence through research to provide guidance to teachers in collaboration with other companies like British Council, Cambridge, ETS, Duolingo, World Learning. So if that is something, then I hope next year you are going to hear some guidance. And TESOL, because we're all TESOLers, right? This is TESOL conventions, the TESOL and others. Anyway, you know what? We still have time. Okay, we have 5 more minutes for questions. Then I will ask each panelist to wrap it up, give us final words on this issue. Okay? I saw hands just now. Yes, this gentleman, you.
I got 2. I guess less of a question and more of a request. In some of the organizations that have a little more reach than just the school district that I help operate, come up with some policies on this to help us out. I know I came up with an AI policy for my school district in the state that I'm from. About a month after this was released, we were one of the first school districts in the United States to have a policy, but when I went out and looked for help on that, there was none, and there's still shockingly none from government agencies. Like, Congress isn't going to do this. We're going to have to do this without them in the United States. I would love TESOL to have a stance on this. That would be spectacular.
Thank you.
Helpful.
Very good. And the other point? That's it?
Oh, that's fine. Just a request from all of you. I mean,
okay.
You're all very important and for important organizations. We could use your help down on the ground.
Thank you very much.
I think the top-down very important, guidance, but bottom-up is just as important. So you need to be influencing proactively your school, the district, with all the insights you're gathering from your involvement with this. The report that Carol referred to, UNESCO, is a really good starting point, actually. It's something you can take to the decision makers in your school, and start engaging with those ideas. And UNESCO, is well established.
Excellent. Thank you. One more question. Yes.
I'm not really sure where this question or comment is going, but I think, I feel like we are standing in front of the invention of the printing press. This is a complete revolution. The world has changed. If you've been in a grocery store lately, you know that we're more and more encouraged to check ourselves out and raise our hand when we have an issue. Is this where we're heading? 25 years ago, we were talking about the sage on the stage versus the guide by the side. Have we all now become the guides on the side? We know that we're in a time when it's very, very hard to hire teachers. Many districts are desperate for teachers. The genie's out of the bottle. How do we harness this genie and turn ourselves into the best guides by the side that we can be as we move more and more toward customized, bespoke education? We know school districts, some high schools have 2,000 to 3,000 students. Gun violence, bullying, fear of being in public places, disillusionment with higher education. My university is starting to fire tenured faculty because we no longer have students coming to our programs. Education has become irrelevant for so many people. So we have this incredible tool. How do we move forward and lead in this rather than running to follow up to what many of our students are already using and harnessing? I feel like policy and some policy statements are helpful, but I'm feeling very lost right now and finding that I want to go to all the sessions that TESOL's offering about how to deal with this, because I know that something big is next. So how do we get ahead of this game from a leadership perspective to help us as we're looking for more? How do we move forward with this? I think that's really what we're asking here.
Excellent question. I think this is the question all of us have some thoughts about, and I'd like to take this opportunity to invite our panelists. Each of them will give us some final thoughts, maybe which might be related to this final question. Cindy.
Obviously don't have a perfect answer to that. If I did, that would be fantastic. But I do, one thing that occurs to me is I think you mentioned bottom up. I think it will be important for institutions like TESOL to talk to and trust young people. And I mean young, like 20 years younger than me. They are savvy, and I think one way to get out of like the doomsday perspective is to trust them a little bit. Like they are going to be able to spot AI generated artwork like that. I think many of them already can. I will be fooled by these things, but they won't be. Why is that? What have they learned as kind of natives to the generative AI space? I think that's really important. I also think they will, and maybe we don't guide them. Maybe we work together as we navigate this landscape to figure out how we use these tools in responsible and ethical ways. And then that generation could help produce the TESOL LLM someday that is used widely by language educators in physical classrooms where there are all these benefits of like embodiment. So again, that's kind of like the optimistic perspective, but I think, one thing I think about is like how terrible my mom's hygiene is with Facebook and her smartphone. Like it's so bad, and 14-year-olds have better digital hygiene than my mom does, and it's because like they are young and they grew up with this and they learned how to make wise decisions that my mom, God bless her, is never going to make. And so I do think that's worth keeping in mind. And again, that's kind of how I think about my 2-year-old right now as well.
Thank you. Others?
Well, I do think that the final question was kind of that big question, right? Where are we going? And I want to go to a nice place. I want to head towards a place where I have lots of friends and I'm happy. And that's, kind of why I was talking about physical presence, and really, I brought my past colleague into it because that's, it really hit on what matters in life, actually being with people and the human intelligence as opposed to artificial intelligence. And I think, Mina actually mentioned something very interesting in her talk about for young people to be very successful, they need to be doing what they actually enjoy. So what you said about bespoke and individualized education, let's tap into what helps people, thrive. So what I recommend is every half hour put a timer on and then ask yourself, did I get lost in technology again, or am I remembering what matters?
That's what I mean by hygiene, to be clear. My mom's hygiene is great. This is what I meant.
All right, let's have Joyce.
So I'm having flashbacks a little bit to when I was on the board here in 2007. The president then of the association stood up in his plenary and he started discussing about the proficiency levels of the future English language learners, particularly in education. And as we were moving forward, there was going to be a need for ESL, EFL teachers to move beyond just, I don't like the word just, to move beyond language education and training to being partners in helping our learners move into their disciplines. Because with their higher proficiencies, we also needed content teachers. Is that right? I'm okay?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
And I eventually, my research area ended up being English medium instruction, and we're going back to the need of language to do something. And it's been a grassroots movement. CALL has been a grassroots movement. And this AI situation I see in my own institution, when we sat down in September, I looked around the room and my colleagues were panicked. Again, we are literature and writing teachers. How are we going to make sure? And I'm like, they could have had their cousin write the paper anyway.
Yes,
exactly. It isn't AI. Yeah, but now they can do it. Right? Yeah. But I think we're going back to still policies come from grassroots places where users are telling the administrations at the highest level are also panicked because we're losing students. We have to be partners in this, and we need those who feel motivated, our burning souls. Those who are the burning souls will help us and lead us. And some of us need to just stay in the classroom with cutting out stuff, but maybe getting some multiple choice questions from ChatGPT. So we partner, we move together from a grassroots level, working top down and bottom up.
Very good. Thank you so much, Mina.
Thank you. So I'm just going to say, do you remember Hans that Joyce presented?
Hans,
he really didn't like it and was angry. So I'm a little bit like him. I'm not angry. I'm not a fan though. And partly I'm not a fan because I don't really trust technology. I'm not sure about generative AI at all. However, I do think it's inevitable. It's happening. It's happened. And I'm going to have to work with it. So I kind of see there are opportunities because I'm eternally positive. And I think there are opportunities at different levels. One, and listening to these lovely teachers here who are still doing what they used to do in the classroom, cutting up stuff, going back to the whiteboard, I think this is a real opportunity for every educator in the entire world to ask themselves, what do I believe about learning and teaching? How does it happen? What is the process? And I think once individuals can answer that question, that will help them to understand how any kind of technology, let alone generative AI, can help them in the classroom. So I think that's a real opportunity, just to go back into ourselves and say, what do I believe is happening in this room or in this environment? I think the other opportunity is about policies. And I agree with my colleagues here. I think policies aren't written in isolation. And I think particularly now in today's environment, policies have to include young people, as Cindy said. I think they definitely have to include teachers. They have to include experts on assessment, on technology, on everything. I think collaborative policies are the way to go. I did have a slide which I then took out, which I hadn't, which brings all the stakeholders into the comprehensive learning system to work together. And if we don't work together, I think policies aren't really going to get us anywhere. But I think the other thing is just really, really going back to what we know and what we trust and what we're good at. And that is good, basic classroom methodology. What is the purpose of what I'm doing? What do I want to achieve? And therefore, how am I going to do it? Is it by just talking person next to me, or is it by getting my students onto the iPad or the iPhone? Just going really back to what is it that I want to achieve with my students, for them, and how am I going to do it?
Thank you very much. We have 4 minutes left. I give you 1 minute each.
I will be quick. So I like your question, how can we stay ahead? I think that's a great question. Another way I like to think of it is how can we put GenAI in its place? And I think we can put GenAI in its place by picking up on what Mina said, not using it, thinking, should I use it? No, yes, but why are we using it? So understanding what it can and can't do. And using it to support language learning principles, that will not change. Using it to make teachers are AI ready, make sure they are for education and transforming assessment. And all of that built on an ethical approach to it. So that really, for me, is the way forward.
Thank you. Last but not least.
And I will continue from your narrative. I would say the opportunities for generative AI in assessment, in classroom-based assessment that teachers need to provide, we haven't talked about it, huge opportunities there. What is the most time-consuming thing when you evaluate students? Giving them feedback, telling them what they need to know about their writing, give them guidance, what they need to do next to improve. And there's a lot, when you try to play around with generative AI, you can generate some useful language tests for the classroom. I'm not talking about the perspective of a large-scale test that I work on. I'm talking about classroom-based assessment and very targeted, personalized, useful feedback about how they wrote an essay, what they understood in a reading passage. There's many opportunities there that we definitely need to explore in the classroom.
Thank you very much. And with that being said, we have really had a wonderful discussion today. I want to make one more point. Happening outside our field, within university settings. What we are trying to do is we are going to revolutionize social sciences and humanities. In humanities, we are talking about digital humanities. In urban sciences, we are talking about smart cities. In technology, in finance, we talk about fintech. In health, we talk about health informatics. So these are happening in our disciplines outside language arena. So this AI, generative AI, is happening unstoppable. The only way is to be ahead of the game, to advance ourselves, knowledge, understanding, take advantage of who we are as teachers. We need to be the driver, not sitting in the back seat. If we can do that, all of us will be happy. No one will lose job until they voluntarily retire. So thank you. I'd like to thank all the panelists today. Thank all of you for attending. And one last thing when you leave the room, remember, TIRF stands for the International Research Foundation for English Language Education. We are going to do more in this area next year. Thank you very much for your support.